This is a Pictures in Motion, in Focus presentation.
In the early years, Western Australia was the Cinderella state, and Perth resembled a small country town until the discovery of gold changed the physical nature of Perth city dramatically, with economic prosperity and an increase of population. In the 1950s, St George's Terrace, Perth's main commercial thoroughfare, home to banks, insurance companies, the stock exchange, and major commercial houses, was a gracious European-style boulevard with few buildings higher than 4 stories. The air highway linking Western Australia and South Australia via the Nullarbor Plain was constructed during the Second World War, but remained largely unsealed until 1976. Great Eastern Highway passed through a massive rubbish dump on the entrance to the city, an eyesore that was not eradicated until years later, when the Burswood Casino estate beautified the city approach in 1985. It was a time before decimal currency. Women were banned from drinking in public bars. A time when the White Australia policy was in force. And steam trains populated our railways. With trolley buses still in use. Perhaps the most exciting events were the opening of the state's first television station, TVW7, in October 1959. And the completion of the Narrows Bridge in November 1959. The bridge, which was built at a cost of £1.5 million, united the north and south side of the Swan River. It was the biggest precast bridge in the world at that time. In 1958, the City of Perth lodged an application with the Australian British Empire and Commonwealth Games Association to host the 7th Games in 1962. Yet prior to the Games, Perth had no world-class sporting facilities. Perth made some big promises to construct the required sporting structures to an international standard, as established by the Olympics, on time and on budget. The major facilities proposed included the main athletic stadium, boxing stadium, rowing facility, Olympic-size swimming pool, and dedicated athletes housing with temporary dining and administration facilities. Proposals for building of an Olympic-size swimming pool in Perth had been canvassed since the late 1940s, but had not come to fruition. Thus the opportunity to build one, as part of the necessary development for the Commonwealth Games, was welcomed. To this end, City of Perth Town Clerk Alan Green's initial design was for a 4-pool centre, to be set in a 20-acre site in Kings Park, as favoured by Lord Mayor Howard. The Kings Park Board agreed in principle to the proposal in November 1954, though this required the permission of State Parliament in 1957. There was considerable public opposition, and committees were formed to safeguard Kings Park. Early Australian feminist and social activist Bessie Rishbeath promoted a citizens' committee for the preservation of Kings Park and the Swan River, and successfully prevented the Olympic swimming pool being built for the 1962 Empire Games in Kings Park, when in October 1959, Parliament rejected the Kings Park Aquatic Bill. As an alternative, Beatty Park was selected as the site on 5 November 1959. Now known as Beatty Park Leisure Centre, it was originally named Perth Aquatic Centre, and built by H.A. Doust, to designs by City of Perth town clerk Alan Green and city architect Milton Boyce. It was the first purpose-built aquatic centre in Western Australia designed and built for international competition. The street address is 220 Vincent Street, North Perth. During the 1960s and 1970s, it garnered widespread recognition from the people of Perth not only for its first-class swimming facilities, but also as a great venue for events, such as the Miss West Coast and Miss Australia Beach Girl Finals, plus music concerts, before the construction of the Perth Concert Hall and Entertainment Centre. ABC radio and television studios were built on the site of a two-storey residence named Rosehill, once the home to George Frederick Stone, formerly an Attorney General, and his son, Edward Stone, formerly a Chief Justice and Lieutenant Governor of Western Australia. The house was demolished in 1954, and work on the new studios began in 1958 at 191 Adelaide Terrace in Perth, extending through to Terrace Road on the river end. ABC Radio moved to the new facilities in 1959, which faced Adelaide Terrace, whilst work continued on the television building, located on the lower part of the site, facing Terrace Road. Finally, on Saturday, May 7, 1960, ABW Channel 2 was launched, providing Perth with 2 television stations. The ABC began their service with an outside broadcast van, which allowed live coverage from beyond the studio, with ABW introducing the viewing public to sports telecasts as early as the trade transmissions, which commenced on the 19th of April 1960. On February 20, 1962, John Glenn became the first American to orbit Earth during a flight on Mercury Friendship 7 that lasted just under 5 hours. During this flight, Glenn observed that the city of Perth was clearly visible from space, and it became known worldwide as the City of Light.
Friendship 7, this is Muse Contact, Deary, over.
Hello, Muse Contact, this is Friendship 7, reading you loud and clear. How many?
Shortly, you may observe some lights down there. You want to take a check on them out to your right, over.
Roger, I'm all set to see if I can't get them in sight.
Roger.
Roger, I do have lights in sight on the ground, over.
Roger, understand. They're just off to your right there.
That's affirmative. Just to my right, I can see a big pattern of lights, apparently right on the coast. I can see the outline of a town and a very bright light just to the south of it.
Roger, that's Perth and Rockingham you're seeing there.
Roger, the lights show up very well, and thank everybody for turning them on, will you?
In 1959, the Perth City Council set aside 65 acres of land near City Beach for the Athletes' Village. Now a densely populated suburb, though in the early 1960s the area was still largely bushland. The 150 houses comprising the Athletes' Village, which housed representatives from 35 different countries, were built by the State Housing Commission. It was planned from the outset for the houses to be sold immediately post-games as private dwellings. Thereby, the village was absorbed into the suburban housing of City Beach, following the games. 2 competitions were held. The first was the layout of the whole village site and shared facilities, and the second was for the architecture of the individual house types. The area now defined as Perry Lakes was a former camp and hunting place for the local indigenous people prior to and following establishment of the Swan River Colony in 1829. White settlement resulted in the area being used for limestone quarrying and farming until 1880, when it was purchased by Joseph Perry, who kept the quarry and limekilns in operation. Many of Perth's early public buildings, including the foundations of the Perth Town Hall, were constructed using limestone from the quarry and kilns. The Limekilns Quarry is now the Quarry Amphitheatre, and the surrounding area is called the Perry Lakes Reserve. It is a 80-hectare, 200-acre reserve with two lakes, East Lake and West Lake, comprising approximately 12.6 hectares, 31 acres. Perry Lakes in its current form dates from 1962, when the area was landscaped in association with the construction of Perry Lake Stadium and associated sporting tracks and facilities for the 1962 Empire Games. The City of Perth, Commonwealth and state governments funded the development of the Perry Lake Stadium complex, which was opened in 1962, at a cost of over £1 million.
Over Perth, an aerial view of the site of the 1962 Commonwealth Games, well on the way to being finished in time for the opening. A distinguished and welcome visitor to the Bold Park Stadium, where the athletic events will be held, was Prime Minister Menzies. For the Games organisers, the visit was an important one because Mr Menzies later announced a further federal government grant of £60,000 towards the cost, in addition to the £100,000 they'd already promised. Mr Menzies was in the West for only 3 days, and the visit to the stadium and the site of the Games village not far away was one of the items on his busy itinerary. From a vantage point at the side of the athletic field, he was able to see the construction work is well underway, and Australia should be well satisfied with the staging of the 1962 Games.
There are 44 countries in the British Empire and Commonwealth. 35 came to these Games. Athletes representing 660 million people. A flag-raising ceremony marks the arrival of men and women from our sister Dominion, New Zealand. The team from Jamaica, later announced as the host nation for the next Games in 1966. Ghana's flag goes aloft. Of course, it's a field day for autograph hunters, with the village packed with champions. Some lucky ones meet Betty Cuthbert. Despite the great occasion, everyday chores must be carried out, including the washing. Apart from sightseeing, there are souvenirs to acquire for those back home. Full banking and currency exchange services are available at the village. West Australia's idol Dixie Willis has a long wait for a gold medal. Her event, the 880 yards, is last on the program. For athletes, officials and VIPs, going walkabout is taken care of with a pool of 70 cars and more than 100 volunteer women drivers. The vehicles, provided by the manufacturers, are available for the duration of the Games.
At Perry Lake Stadium, the ABW2 and TVW7 OB vans were parked next to each other. Film and television cameras were provided with multi-level platforms for placing their equipment. To take advantage of these ideal viewing positions, the ABC crew was much larger than Seven's, owing to staff having dedicated roles, such as drivers, riggers, producers and technicians, who also acted as cameramen. TVW Channel 7 also needed an outside broadcast van, so rather than purchase one, TVW engineer John Quick was tasked with designing and building one, which he achieved with the assistance of Bert King. John also was responsible for the design and acquisition of a camera dolly, which was often called the pram. A most handy device used for a wide range of outside broadcasts, and also at times employed by a film crew. John O'Callaghan was the supervising technician, whilst Alan Bateman was the senior technician on the van at Perry Lakes. TVW's inaugural news editor Darcy Farrell was not only pivotal to Seven's planning and preparations, but he was also the director in the OB van who coordinated the opening ceremony telecast for Seven. It was a busy time for news as the space race was underway and Perth was beginning to grow from a small town to a large metropolis. This resulted in associated growing pains, which were also manifest in a terrifying crime wave that held everyone in the grip of a mysterious serial killer who randomly picked on Perth households at night.
A mystery gunman shot 2 people dead in Vincent and Louise Streets, Nedlands.
I don't think we've seen the city before or since gripped in such a way.
A 3rd man was critically wounded and the gunman fired upon 2 other people sitting in a parked car.
I think it was a fear born of utter helplessness because people just didn't know where this killer was.
The gunman vanished into the night as mysteriously as he had arrived. He left few clues.
I know of stories of people actually crawling to the door and peeking out through the window. It was genuinely a very, very frightening period. During the Cook era, there also occurred another event which we won an award for. We called it Manhunt. And that was the case of Brian William Robinson shooting several people, including a policeman, escaped into the Nangara pine plantation, and he was there for more than 24 hours before he was hunted down. And we sent reporter Bob Cribb, who died recently, and Bob went into the Nangara forest with a small rigged up OB unit which we had.
A TVW mobile van and RAAF vehicles were pressed into service to help floodlight the long lanes running through the forest.
23-year-old Brian William Robinson was hanged at Fremantle Jail on January 1964. 9 months later, serial killer Eric Edgar Cook became the last person hanged in WA.
The drama has ended. Phase 2 of the great crime wave of '63 is over.
During the 1962 Games, John Quick was busy facilitating TVW's coverage of the lawn bowls, rowing and cycling. This was confined to one borrowed RCA television camera, using an International Harvester AB-120 all-wheel drive van operated by John Quick, John O'Callaghan, an audio operator, and a cameraman. The camera was provided by Alan Gibbs, the manager of RCA Melbourne, who assisted with the coverage. This small OB unit was also used to cover the Duke of Edinburgh's arrival at Perth Airport. Another important acquisition by both stations was the recently invented videotape recording facilities. The ABC chose Ampex equipment, whilst TVW used 3 RCA TRT-1B machines for the games. In 1962, a major redevelopment of Perth Airport was underway in preparation for the 1962 Commonwealth Games, which were held in Perth. The airlines were able to move from their old hangars into a new combined passenger terminal, designed by the Commonwealth Department of Works, and opened just in time to handle 1962 Games traffic increases. In January 1962, the main north-south runway was extended to take larger Boeing 707s. Prior to that, Qantas was using Lockheed Constellations on their Wallaby service from Sydney to South Africa via Perth, the Cocos Islands and Mauritius. In March 1962, the control tower and fire station opened, replacing the old World War II tower. Then on the 13th of October 1962, the new terminal building was officially opened. This is now the site of Domestic Terminal 3. The 1962 British Empire and Commonwealth Games were held in Perth, Western Australia, from the 22nd of November to the 1st of December 1962. Athletic events were held at Perry Lake Stadium in the suburb of Floreat, and swimming events at Beatty Park in North Perth. Track cycling was held at the Lake Munga Velodrome. The Dalkeith Nedlands Bowling Club hosted the bowls. Boxing was held at the Perry Lakes Boxing Stadium. Road cycling was through Kings Park. Fencing was in the Victoria Park Army Drill Hall. Rowing was in the Canning River. Weightlifting was in the South Perth City Hall, and wrestling was at the Royal Kings Park Tennis Club.
50,000 people filled to capacity the superb Perry Lake Stadium. 5 miles from the city centre and built at a cost of £1 million. The Prime Minister of Australia, Mr. Robert Menzies, was welcomed by Sir Arthur Porritt, Chairman of the Games Federation. The stage was now set for the arrival of the Duke of Edinburgh. In his open car, he made a circuit of the stadium. Just before the official opening words, Prince Philip inspected the Guard of Honour. A message from the Queen, and then, spot on, came the fly past. Wales, as the host country of the last Commonwealth Games, had the honour of leading the march past of the athletes. The Canadians. The Scottish contingent. They came from 35 countries from all parts of the Commonwealth. The smartness of the Ghanaians won praise all round. The English athletes, men and women, were determined to bring home some of those coveted gold medals. In many ways, the most powerful teams are the Australians themselves. The soil down under nourishes first-rate athletes and games players out of all proportion to the country's comparatively small population. Now, with all the teams lined up, came the moment for the ceremonial entry of the flag of the Games. Then the release of the 2,000 pigeons following the ritual of these Commonwealth meetings.
TVW telecast, without a hitch, 70 hours 10 minutes of games material, direct telecasts from venues, studio discussions, and commentaries, and filmed reports. Over the 10-day games period, this represented an average of more than 7 hours of games telecasting a day. TVW arranged for an impressive lineup of sporting commentators to cover this important sporting event. They included former champion miler Herb Elliott, who was flown from London, former champion runners Mike Agostini from Melbourne, and Gordon Puri from London via Sydney, controversial athletics coach Percy Cerruti from Melbourne, former Olympic high jump gold medalist John Winter, top Australian swimming coaches Harry Gallagher and Harry Kelly, and leading sporting commentators Tony Charlton, GTV Melbourne, and Frank Bird, ATN Sydney. These specialists were supplemented by 26 local commentators. TVW announcer Lloyd Lawson was chosen by the Games authorities to describe the opening and closing ceremonies at the Perry Lakes Stadium. The station's technical staff was also supplemented by crews loaned by TCN, GTV, and HSV. TVW used 3 outside broadcast units to cover the major sports: athletics, swimming, boxing, rowing, cycling and bowls, and Perth Airport for the arrival and departure of the Duke of Edinburgh. Film camera units also gave comprehensive coverage of wrestling, weightlifting and fencing, and supplemented the direct telecasts of bowls, boxing and cycling. TVW provided a daily half-hour report of games highlights for GTV and HSV in Melbourne, NWS, and ADS in Adelaide, NBN Newcastle, and QTQ in Brisbane. The reports were hosted by TVW commentator Doug Gilmore.
Only Australia, with 38 goals, did better than the motherland. The dramatic 100-yard final. Anteo of Kenya, winner in 9.5. They say Serafino Anteo is one of the great sprinters of all time. Look now at the 3,000 metres steeplechase, bearing in mind that, like many of the track events, it was run in blistering heat. And in the picture early on, Vincent of Australia, with Maurice Heriot, England, running second. Vincent and Heriot over the water. On to the finish, and it's a glorious win for Australia's Trevor Vincent. For second place, Heriot had to be content with the silver medal. Winner's time, 8 minutes, 43.4. G.A. Miller, England, failing at 6'9" in the high jump. Now P. Hodson, Australia, setting a games record, 6'11". When in Australia, do as the Aussies do. The women's 100-yard final run in the teeth of a high wind. Dorothy Hyman wins. Good for Dorothy, good for England. Her time, 11.2. The gold medal presented by Sir Arthur Porritt, chairman of the Games. So Dorothy is now champion of the Empire as well as Europe. That's right, give it a kiss. It's a far cry from the women's 100 yards to the men's 6 miles. And just imagine 6 miles in that boiler house heat. In the bunch here are Martin Hyman and Mel Batty, both of England, and that fabulous Bruce Kidd, the 19-year-old Canadian, whom some experts believe to be the greatest long-distance runner ever seen. And at this stage, the first 3 are Mel Batty, Bruce Kidd, and Power of Australia. As if he could smell the tape, Kidd calmly took his rightful place at the front, a wonderful winner. In 28 minutes, 26.6, Kidd set a Commonwealth Games record. Gordon Perry congratulated Peter Snell of New Zealand on his 880 yards Games record. Now over to Beatty Park for some sensational swimming. And how the stars of the track must envy athletes who can win records and stay cool. We're in time for the women's final, 110 yards backstroke. 2 great rivals in these games are competing, the London schoolgirl 15-year-old Linda Ludgrove and Australia's Pam Sargent, who beat Linda in the first leg of the medley relay the day before. Both of them great swimmers. Tremendous finish. Linda's the winner in 1 minute 11.1. Pam Sargent second. There you are, fame at 15. No wonder the ASA votes her the outstanding swimmer of the year. And then later on, Linda won another gold medal for the 220 yards backstroke with a world record time. G. Dubel of Australia off the high board. Dubel eventually came second to that pocket-sized English wonder, Brian Phelps. They say this youngster hits the water at 40 miles an hour from the 10-metre board. Phelps' second gold at Perth. A. Kitcher, also England. Phelps again. Girls again. The 110 yards breaststroke. In this style, there's nobody nowadays to touch Anita Lonsborough. There's Anita going great guns. finish, and it's Anita Lonsborough who gets the touch, only inches ahead of Vivian Haddon of New Zealand. Time for both girls, 1 minute 21.3, a games record. This was the second gold medal for Anita, the girl from Huddersfield. She won 3 in all. And back now to Perry Lake Stadium for the start of the marathon. And what a blessed relief, pouring rain and degrees cooler. Otherwise, said Perth's medical opinion, it would have been dangerous to run a race of 26 miles. Competitors ran 1 lap of the stadium, and England's hopes were centred on Brian Kilby, unmatched in the gruelling test both in Britain and Europe. Nobody in the stadium can have envied the runners what lay ahead of them. Well, all they have to do now is keep right on to the end of the road just for 26 miles. Leaving the marathon well on its way, back to the stadium, where the rain wasn't at all popular for the 440 yards final. George Kerr, Jamaica, leading from Bobby Brightwell and Omolo of Uganda. It's Kerr's race, with Brightwell falling on his face in a vain attempt. Kerr's time, 46.7. The women's 220 yards final. England's hope, the great Dorothy Hyman. Holding off the challenge of the 2 Australians, Bennett and Burbill, Dorothy Hyman won the race and her second gold medal. What a great sprinter this girl is. Now back to the open road and the marathon again. And, as might have been expected, Brian Kilby was in the lead from Power of Australia. And what a reception as Kilby came back into the stadium, apparently as fresh as if he's only run 1 mile. In 2 hours, 21.17, a games record, Kilby ran his fastest marathon ever and became Empire champion. Another gold medal to make up the British total of 33.
Built by Perth City Council at a cost of £110,000, Lake Munga Velodrome opened on the 6th of March 1959 and hosted the National Amateur Championships the following Saturday. The track was built as an exact replica in size and shape as the 1956 Melbourne Olympics cycling track. There was seating for 3,600 spectators and standing room for a further 2,000 people. Australian cyclists won all track cycling events at the Perth Games. It was the first time in the 32-year history of the Commonwealth Games that one country had won all track titles. In 1985 it was home to Floreat Athena soccer team. The velodrome's tracks were covered with grassy banks, and there are now 2 grandstands, holding up to 5,000 people. It is now called the E&D Leiter Stadium. The Dalkeith Nedlands Bowling Club hosted the bowls. Rowing events were conducted in the Canning River. The temperature reached 40 degrees Celsius on the day the games were opened, and despite the scorching heat, being 103.9 degrees Fahrenheit, the hottest November day in Perth for 49 years, and 50 bushfires raging in the metropolitan area, a crowd of 50,000 people attended. Australia finished at the top of the medal table in Perth. Swimmers Dawn Fraser and Murray Rose, amongst others, excelled in the pool. Both Fraser and Rose won 4 gold medals. Australians won 12 gold medals in athletics and gold in all track cycling events. Betty Cuthbert won gold in the women's 4x110 yards relay in what was the last of 3 Commonwealth Games in which she represented Australia. The only sport in which Australia failed to win a medal was lawn bowls.
The last race was ended at Perry Lake Stadium. The last result was on the scoreboard. Another victory for Australia, the most successful country in the Commonwealth Games. All that remained was the closing ceremony, in which the athletes of 35 countries marched into the arena. There were nearly 900 of them. Presiding over the ceremony was the Duke of Edinburgh. He had officially opened the games, the friendly games they call them now, and that was the spirit in which they closed. None of the rancour which big athletic meetings sometimes generate. Family rivalry with no quarter asked or given, as the Queen predicted in her message, but all in good part. A model of what the Commonwealth Games are designed to be. The flag of the Games, which flew over the stadium throughout the contests, was hauled down and ceremoniously marched out. The next time a Games flag will fly in the breeze will be 4 years hence in Jamaica. What a lot could happen in the world of athletics during that interval. What new stars will arise for 1966? This was no military march past. Whatever may have been the intention of the organizers, everybody relaxed. It's on such occasions that all realize what a real friend the Duke is. A born sportsman and a games player, he knew under what strain the competitors had been. What a relief it was to be able to look back on it all. A close-up for the album at home, and then Prince Philip made his own exit. So ended the 7th British Empire and Commonwealth Games. A credit to everyone who took part, and to Australia, especially Perth. The organisation was wonderful, and what a grand family welcome the city gave to all.
Many other and varied events were held at Perry Lake Stadium over the years, such as the athletics, basketball, soccer, rugby, concerts and arena events. The purpose-built Perry Lakes Basketball Stadium was used for the Australian Basketball Senior Men's Championships held in October 1962, and was Western Australia's home of basketball until 2010. The stadium housed the headquarters of Basketball Western Australia and Perry Lakes Basketball Association. The Perth Wildcats played their home games at Perry Lakes between 1982 and 1986, while the Perth Lynx played at Perry Lakes between 1988 and 2010. The facilities were venue for the Public Schools Association and Associated and Catholic Colleges of Western Australia, ACC, athletics carnivals, and was also used for the Cancer Council of Western Australia's Relay for Life. The opening and closing ceremonies for the annual Country Week Sports Carnival were also held at the stadium. World Championship Wrestling was presented at Perry Lakes. It was an Australian professional wrestling promotion that ran from 1964 until 1978, featuring stars such as Dominic DeNucci and Killer Kowalski. This was a very popular series broadcast on television, where the live wrestling matches were highly promoted. It seemed to be extremely violent, though in reality the wrestling stars were highly choreographed athletes who provided a convincing performance for the eager audience. Famous English soccer clubs Manchester United and Liverpool drew big crowds to the stadium, and it has hosted Australia's best athletes at national meetings. At a rugby union international between WA and South Africa in June 1971, apartheid-fueled violence erupted. 40 police broke up clashes between protesters for and against the controversial tour. Cine cameraman Michael Goodall captured these scenes of the 1971 Disney on Parade premiere in Perth on 35mm film. The tent had been set up in the middle of the Perry Lakes training track. Former TVW veteran Tim Bohars rescued this footage and kept it all these years, though the footage has faded with time. Finally, a colour TV camera was employed to record the show for broadcast in the United States. TVW cameraman Bob Finkel and Murray Kelso captured the performance using the NTSC system for US purposes. The venue closed in mid-2009 following completion of the new WA Athletic Stadium, and demolition of the stadium began in April 2010, with the grandstand being demolished in September 2012. This was to make way for a residential development.
Demolition of Perry Lakes Stadium has begun, with the bulldozers moving in early today. Minor buildings at the complex, including toilet blocks and fences, were knocked down this morning as part of the scheduled demolition of the entire stadium. Perry Lakes, which was constructed more than 45 years ago to host the 1962 Commonwealth Games, is being torn down to make way for housing. Demolition of the main stadium will begin in May 2010.
Here it is 55 years later. The track now a suburban street. Houses instead of athletes. A piece of Perth history replaced but always remembered. The grandstand came down 6 years ago. Construction has been going on ever since. But one important piece of the puzzle has just been finished, the iconic scoreboard.
I can't imagine you've worked with a scoreboard before.
No, and sometimes with projects the greatest challenges are the greatest opportunities.
It's quite an unusual building. It's very narrow and long inside, and so it didn't really present itself to any obvious answers in terms of use.
It was a technical marvel back in '62, but the old scoreboard fell into disrepair and became a target for vandals.
And it was really going down the chute.
I guess on paper we should have got rid of it because it was obviously presented a significant challenge. However, that was just not going to happen because we were very aware that it was a significant building in terms of the community.
Developer TRG Properties has just finished Empire Apartments, 123 units which sit either side of the scoreboard.
We didn't simply want to reinstate it and leave it there as an empty, vacant shell. We wanted to reuse the building.
So what do you do with such a fiddly space? It's zoned residential, but is too small to be an apartment.
It seemed to really present itself as a bonus for residence facilities.
Step inside the finished product. On the ground floor, a residence lounge and games area with reminders of that famous fortnight 55 years ago. Upstairs, a gym. Remember, this is inside the scoreboard. Outside, they've restored what they thought was the original clock, but it turns out the old one was square, and this one is round.
I don't know if this is true or not, but I've heard from a couple of different people that apparently the original clock is sitting somewhere in Melbourne, possibly Flinders Station. I think we should be petitioning Melbourne to return our Empire Games clock.
Gone are the lights used to flash up names and countries, replaced with very modern solar panels, which generate 5 kilowatts of power for the common areas.
What we wanted to do to give the building a real significance is to change it from being an energy consumer or high energy consumer as the original Scoreboard into a high energy producer.
Much has now changed in the Perry Lakes precinct. New sporting facilities have since been developed close by. The Bendat Basketball Centre is a multi-purpose stadium that features 8 courts, including 2 basketball show courts with 1,100 permanent seats and 900 retractable seats, and a 6-court sports hall with multi-sport line markings. The Bendat Basketball Centre is home to the Perth Lynx basketball team and is the training facility for the Perth Wildcats. WA Athletics Stadium is the main facility for the sport of athletics in Perth. It was constructed to replace the ageing Perry Lakes Stadium nearby, which had been in use since the 1962 British Empire and Commonwealth Games. HBF Stadium. Perth Superdrome, known as HBF Stadium under commercial naming rights arrangement, is home to the Western Australian Institute of Sport. UWA Hockey Club. The University of WA Hockey Club is one of the largest hockey clubs in Western Australia, with over 400 members in men's, women's and junior teams. It is part of the UWA Sports Park, a multi-purpose sporting and recreation reserve owned by the University of Western Australia. The park provides sporting facilities for Australian rules football, rugby union, soccer, and field hockey, as well as baseball, softball and tennis. So as the Perry Lakes region has changed since 1962, so has Perth. Going from a large country town to a modern metropolis. City of Perth development applications as of January 2021. Many new building and development applications have been approved within the City of Perth boundaries, so growth of the city seems unstoppable at this stage. With more adventurous architecture and increased height, with the ever-growing number of skyscrapers. In conclusion, we need to pay tribute to the many broadcasting people who brought this spectacle to the viewing and listening audiences. Sadly, many of these pioneering folk are no longer with us. It is therefore fitting to credit the valued work of many of them. Listed here are staff we know who were working for both TVW Channel 7 and ABW Channel 2 during the 1962 games. We apologise for any we may have missed.
That was a Pictures in Motion, in Focus presentation.